Hey guys, welcome to my channel. Know Better, Do Better with Jess. We're up to day 15 of my Christmas countdown. It didn't turn out to be a daily video countdown because I got sick. But we're going to start part 3 of The Nutcracker and the Mouse King. Let's get started. Chapter 8, Uncle and Nephew. Should any of my respected readers or listeners ever have happened to be cut by glass, they will know what an exceedingly nasty thing it is, and how long it takes to get well. Marie was obliged to stay in bed a whole week because she felt so terribly giddy whenever she tried to stand up. But at last she was quite well again, and able to jump about as of old. Things in the glass cupboard looked very fine indeed. Everything new and shiny, trees and flowers and houses, toys of every kind. Above all, Marie found her dear Nutcracker again, smiling at her in the second shelf, with his teeth all sound and right. As she looked at this pet of hers with much fondness, it suddenly struck her that all Godpapa Drosselmeyer's story had been about Nutcracker and his family feud with Dame Mousy-Rinks and her people. And now she knew that her Nutcracker was none other than a young Mr. Drosselmeyer of Nuremberg, Godpapa Drosselmeyer's delightful nephew, unfortunately under the spell of Dame Mousy-Rinks. For whilst the story was being told, Marie couldn't doubt for a moment that the clever clockmaster at Pirlipat's father's court was Godpapa Drosselmeyer himself. But why didn't your uncle help you? Why didn't he help you? Marie cried sorrowfully, as she felt more and more clearly every moment that in the battle which she had witnessed, the question in dispute had been no less a matter than Nutcracker's crown and kingdom. Weren't all the other toys his subjects, and wasn't it clear that the astronomer's prophecy that he was to be rightful king of Toyland had come true? While the clever Marie was weighing out all these things in her mind, she kept expecting that Nutcracker and his vassals would give some indication of being alive, and make some movement as she looked at them. This, however, was by no means the case. Everything in the cupboard kept quite motionless and still. Marie thought that this was the effect of Dame Mousy-Rinks' enchantments, and those of her 7-headed son, which still were keeping up their power. But, she said, though you're not able to move or to say the least little word to me, dear Mr. Drosselmeyer, I know you understand me, and see how very well I wish you. Always I reckon on my assistance when you require it. At all events, I will ask your uncle to aid you with all his great skill and talents, whenever there may be an opportunity. Nutcracker still kept quiet and motionless, but Marie fancied that a gentle sigh came breathing through the glass cupboard, which made its panes ring in a wonderful, though all but imperceivable manner, while something like a little bell-toned voice seemed to sing, "Marie, fine angel mine, I will be thine if thou wilt be mine." Although a sort of cold shiver ran through her at this, still it caused her the keenest pleasure. Twilight came on. Marie's father came in with Godpapa Drosselmeyer, and presently Louise set out the tea table, and the family took their places around it, talking in the pleasantest and merriest manner all about all sorts of things. Marie had taken her little stool and sat down at her godpapa's feet in silence, when everyone happened to cease talking at the same time. Marie looked at her godpapa full in the face with her great blue eyes and said, "I know now, godpapa, that my Nutcracker is your nephew, young Mr. Drosselmeyer, from Nuremberg. The prophecy has come true. He is a king and a prince, just as your friend, the astronomer, said he would be. But you know as well as I do that he is at war with Dame Mousy-Rinks' son, that horrid king of the mice. Why don't you help him?" Marie told the whole story of the battle, as she had witnessed it, and was frequently interrupted by the loud laughter of her mother and sister. But Fritz and Drosselmeyer listened quite gravely. "Where in the name of goodness has the child got her head filled with all that nonsense?" cried her father. "She has such a lively imagination, you see," said her mother. "She dreamt it all when she was feverish with her arm." "It is all nonsense," cried Fritz, "and it isn't true. My red hussars are not such cowards as all that. If they were, do you suppose I should command them?" But Godpapa smiled strangely, and took little Marie on his knee, speaking more gently to her than ever he had been known to do before. "More is given to you, Marie dear," he said, "than to me, or the others. You are a born princess, like Pirlipat, and reign in a bright, beautiful country, but you still have much to suffer. If you mean to befriend poor transformed Nutcracker, for the king of the mice lies in wait for him at every turn. But I cannot help him. You and you only only can do that. So be faithful and true." Neither Marie nor any of the others knew what Godpapa Drosselmeyer meant by these words, but they struck Dr. Stahlbaum, the father, as being so strange that he felt Drosselmeyer's pulse and said, "There seems to be a good deal of congestion about the head. My dear sir, I'll just write you a little prescription." But Marie's mother shook her head meditatively and said, "I have a strong idea what Mr. Drosselmeyer means, though I can't exactly put it in words." Chapter 9. Victory. It was not very long before Marie was awakened one bright moonlight night by a curious noise, which came from one of the corners of her room. There was a sound of small stones being thrown, and rolled here and there, and between, while came a horrible cheeping and squeaking. "Oh, dear me, here come those abominable mice again," cried Marie in terror, and she would have awakened her mother, but the noise suddenly ceased, and she could not move a muscle, for she saw the king of the mice working himself out through a hole in the wall, and at least he came into the room, ran about in it, and got to the little table on her bed head with a great jump. He cried, "Give me your sweetmeats, out of your cakes, marchpane and sugar stick, gingerbread cakes. Don't pause to argue. If yield them you won't, I'll chew up Nutcracker, see if I don't." As he cried out these terrible words, he gnashed and chattered his teeth most frightfully, and then made off again through the hole in the wall. This frightened Marie so that she was quite pale in the morning, and so upset that she scarcely could utter a word. 100 times she felt impelled to tell her mother or her sister, or at all events her brother, what had happened. But she thought, of course none of them would believe me, they would only laugh at me. But she saw well enough that to succor Nutcracker she would have to sacrifice all of her sweet things, so she laid out all she had of them at the bottom of the cupboard next evening. "I can't make out how the mice have got into the sitting room," she said her mother. "This is something quite new. There never were any there before. See, Marie, they've eaten up all of your sweetmeats." And so it was. The epicure mouse king hadn't found the marchpane altogether to his taste, but had gnawed all around the edges of it, so that what he had left of it had to be thrown into the ash pit. Marie never minded about her sweetmeats, being delighted to think that she had saved Nutcracker by means of them. But what were her feelings when the next night there came a queaking again, close by her ear? Alas, the king of the mice was there again, with his eyes glaring worse than the night before. "Give me your sugar toys," he cried. "Give them you must, or else I'll chew Nutcracker up into dust." Then he was gone again. Marie was very sorry. She had as beautiful a collection of sugar toys as ever a little girl could boast of. Not only had she a charming little shepherd, with a shepherd looking after a flock of milk-white sheep, with a nice dog jumping about them, but 2 postmen with letters in their hands, and 4 couples of prettily dressed young gentlemen, and most beautifully dressed young ladies, swinging in a Russian swing. Then there were 2 or 3 dancers, and behind them Farmer Fellman and the Maid of Orleans. Marie didn't much care about them, but back in the corner there was a little baby with red cheeks, and this was Marie's darling. The tears came to her eyes. "Oh," she cried, turning to Nutcracker, "I really will do all I can to help you, but it's very hard." Nutcracker looked at her so piteously that she determined to sacrifice everything, for she remembered the Mouse King with all of his 7 mouths wide open to swallow the poor young fellow. So that night she set down all of her sugar figures in front of the cupboard, as she had the sweetmeats the night before. She kissed the shepherd, the shepherdess, and the lambs, and at last she brought her best beloved of all, the little red-cheeked baby, from its corner, but did put it in a little further back than the rest. Farmer Fellman and the Maid of Orleans had to stand in the front rank of all. "This is really getting too bad," said Marie's mother the next morning. "Some nasty mouse or other must have made a hole in the glass cupboard, for poor Marie's sugar figures are all eaten and gnawed." Marie really could not restrain her tears, but she was soon able to smile again, for she thought, "What does it matter? Nutcracker is safe." In the evening, Marie's mother was telling her father and Godpapa Drosselmeyer about the mischief which some mouse was doing in the children's cupboard, and her father said, "It's a regular nuisance. What a pity it is that we can't get rid of it. It's destroying all the poor child's things." Fritz intervened and remarked, "The baker downstairs has a fine gray counselor of legation. I'll go and get a hold of him, and he'll soon put a stop to it and bite the mouse's head off, even if it's Dame Mousey Rinks herself, or her son, King of the Mice." "Oh, yes," said his mother, laughing, "and jump on up to the chairs and tables, knock down the cups and glasses, and do ever so much mischief besides." "No, no," answered Fritz. "The baker's counselor of legation is a very clever fellow. I wish I could walk about on the edge of the roof as he does." "Don't let us have a nasty cat in the house in the night time," said Louise, who hated cats. "Fritz is quite right, though," said another. "Unless we set a trap. Haven't we got such a thing in the house?" "Godpapa Drosselmeyer's the man to get us one," said Fritz. "It was he who invented them, you know." Everybody laughed, and when the mother said they did not possess such a thing, Drosselmeyer said he had plenty, and he actually sent a very fine one round that day. When the cook was browning the fat, Marie, with her head full of the marvels of Godpapa's tale, called out to her, "Ah, take care, Queen, remember Dame Mousie Rinks and her people." But Fritz drew his sword and cried, "Let them come in if they dare. I'll give an account of them." But everything about the hearth remained quiet and undisturbed, as Drosselmeyer was fixing the browned fat on the fine thread and setting the trap gently down in the glass cupboard. Fritz cried, "Now, Godpapa Clockmaker, mind that the Mouse King doesn't play you some trick." Oh, how did it fare with Marie that night? Something as cold as ice went tripping about on her arm, and something rough and nasty laid itself on her cheek, and cheeped and queaked in her ear. The horrible Mouse King came and sat on her shoulder, foamed a blood-red foam out of his 7 mouths, and chattering and grinding his teeth, he hissed into Marie's ear. "Hiss, hiss, keep away, don't go in there. Wary of that house, don't you get caught, death to the mouse. Hand out your picture books, none of your scornful looks. Give me your dresses, also your laces, or if you don't leave, I won't. Nutcracker, I'll bite, drag him out of your sight, his last hour is near, so tremble for fear. Fee-fo-fum-fum, his last hour is come. Hee-hee-tee-tee, queek-queek." Marie was overwhelmed with anguish and sorrow, and was looking quite pale and upset when her mother said to her the next morning, "This horrid mouse hasn't been caught, but never mind, dear, we'll catch the nasty thing yet, never fear. If the traps won't do, Fritz shall fetch the Grey Counselor of Legation." As soon as Marie was alone, she went up to the glass cupboard, and said to Nutcracker in a voice broken by sobs, "Oh, my dear good Mr. Drosselmeyer, what can I do for you, poor unfortunate girl that I am? Even if I give that horrid king of the mice all my picture books, and my new dress which the child Christ gave me at Christmas as well, he's sure to go on asking for more, so I soon shan't have anything more left, and he'll want to eat me. Oh, poor thing that I am, what shall I do, what shall I do?" As she was thus crying and lamenting, she noticed that a great spot of blood had been left, since the eventful night of the battle, upon Nutcracker's neck. Since she had known that he was really young Mr. Drosselmeyer, her godpapa's nephew, she had given up carrying him in her arms and petting and kissing him. Indeed, she felt a delicacy about touching him at all. But now she took him carefully out of his shelf, and began to wipe off this blood spot with her handkerchief. What were her feelings when she found that Nutcracker was growing warmer and warmer in her hand, and beginning to move? She put him back into the cupboard as fast as she could. His mouth began to wobble backwards and forwards, and he began to whisper with much difficulty, "Oh, dearest Miss Stahlbaum, most precious of friends, how deeply I am indebted to you for everything, for everything! But don't sacrifice any of your picture books or pretty dresses for me. Get me a sword. A sword is what I want. If you get me that, I'll manage the rest, though. He may—" There Nutcracker's speech died away, and his eyes, which had been expressing the most sympathetic grief, grew staring and lifeless again. Marie felt no fear. She jumped for joy, rather, now that she knew how to help Nutcracker without further painful sacrifices. But where on earth was she to get a hold of a sword for him? She resolved to take counsel with Fritz. And that evening, when their father and mother had gone out, and the two were sitting beside the glass cupboard, she told him what had passed between her and the Nutcracker, with the king of the mice, and what it was that was required to rescue Nutcracker. The thing which chiefly exercised Fritz's mind was Marie's statement as to the unexemplary conduct of his red hussars in the great battle. He asked her once more most seriously to assure him if it really was the truth, and when she had repeated her statement, on her word of honor, he advanced to the cupboard and made his hussars a most affecting address, and as punishment for their behavior, he solemnly took their plums, one by one, out of their bushbees. and prohibited him from sounding the march of the hussars of the guard for the space of a 12-month. When he had performed this duty, he turned to Marie and said, "As far as the sword is concerned, I have it in my power to assist Nutcracker. I placed an old colonel of the cuirassiers on retirement on a pension, no longer ago than yesterday, so that he has no further occasion for his saber, which is sharp." This colonel was settled on his pension in the back corner of the third shelf. He was fetched out from thence, and then his saber, still bright and handsome silver weapon, taken off and girt about the Nutcracker. The next night Marie could not close an eye for anxiety. About midnight she fancied she heard a strange stirring and noise in the sitting-room, a rustling and a clanging, and all at once came a shrill "Queek!" "The king of the mice! The king of the mice!" she cried, and jumped out of bed, all terror. Everything was silent, but soon there came a gentle tapping at the door of her room, and a soft voice made itself heard, saying, "Please to open your door, dear Mrs. Stahlbaum. Don't be in the least degree alarmed. Good happy news." It was Drosselmeyer's voice, young Drosselmeyer's. She threw on her dressing gown, and she opened the door as quickly as possible. There stood Nutcracker with his sword, all covered with blood, in his right hand, and a little wax taper in his left. When he saw Marie, he knelt down on one knee and said, "It was you and you only, dearest lady, who inspired me with knightly valor, and steeled me with strength to do battle with the insolent caitiff who dared to insult you. The treacherous king of the mice lies vanquished and writhing in his gore. Deign, lady, to accept these tokens of victory from the hand of him who is, till death, your true and faithful knight." With this, Nutcracker took from his left arm the 7 crowns of the Mouse King, which he had ranged upon it, and handed them to Marie, who received them with the keenest pleasure. Nutcracker rose and continued as follows: "Oh, my best beloved Mrs. Stahlbaum, if you would only take the trouble to follow me for a few steps, what glorious and beautiful things I could show you. At this supreme moment, when I have overcome my hereditary foe, do come with me, dearest lady." Chapter 10. Toyland. I feel quite convinced, children, that none of you would have hesitated for a moment to go with good, kind Nutcracker, who had always shown himself to be such a charming person, and Marie was all the more disposed to do as he asked her, because she knew what her just claims on his gratitude were, and was sure that he would keep his word, and show her all sorts of beautiful things. So she said, "I will go with you, dear Mr. Drosselmeyer, but it mustn't be very far, and it won't do to be very long, because you know I haven't had any sleep yet." "Then we will go by the shortest route," said Nutcracker, "although it is perhaps rather the most difficult." He went on in front, followed by Marie, till he stopped before the big old wardrobe. Marie was surprised to see that, though it was generally shut, the doors of it were now wide open, so that she could see her father's traveling cloak of foxfur hanging in the front. Nutcracker clambered deftly up this cloak by the edging and trimmings of it, so as to get a hold of the big tassel which was fastened at the back of it by a thick cord. He gave this tassel a tug, and a pretty little ladder of cedar wood let itself quickly down through one of the armholes of the cloak. "Now, Miss Stahlbaum, step up that ladder, if you'll be so kind," said Nutcracker. Marie did so, but as soon as she had got up through the armhole and began to look out at the neck, all at once a dazzling light came streaming on to her, and she found herself standing on a lovely, sweet-scented meadow, from which millions of sparks were streaming upward, like the glitter of a beautiful gem. "This is Candymead, where we are now," said Nutcracker, "but we'll go in at that gate there." Marie looked up and saw a beautiful gateway on the meadow, only a few steps off. It seemed to be made of white, brown, and raisin-colored marble, but when she came close to it, she saw it was all baked sugar, almonds, and raisins, which, as Nutcracker said when they were going through, it was the reason it was called Almond and Raisin Gate. There was a gallery running around the upper part of it, apparently made of barley sugar, and in this gallery 6 monkeys, dressed in red doublets, were playing on brass instruments in the most delightful manner ever heard, so that it was all that Marie could do to notice that she was walking along upon a beautiful variegated marble pavement, which, however, was really a mosaic of lozenges of all colors. Presently the sweetest of odors came breathing around her, streaming from a beautiful little wood on both sides of the way. There was such a glittering and sparkling among the dark foliage that one could see all the gold and silver fruits hanging on the many-tinted stems, and these stems and branches were all ornamented and dressed up in ribbons and bunches of flowers, like brides and bridegrooms, festive wedding guests. And as the orange perfume came wafted on the wings of a gentle zephyr, there was a coughing among the leaves and branches, and all the gold leaf and tinsel rustled and tinkled like beautiful music, to which the sparkling lights could not help dancing. "Oh, how charming this is!" cried Marie, enraptured. "This is Christmas wood, dearest Miss Stallbaum," said the Nutcracker. "Oh," said Marie, "if I could only stay here for a little. Oh, it is so lovely." Nutcracker clapped his little hands, and immediately there appeared a number of little shepherds and shepherdesses, and hunters and huntresses, so white and delicate that you would have thought they were made of pure sugar, whom Marie had not noticed before, although they'd been walking about in the woods, and they brought a beautiful gold reclining chair, laid down with white satin cushion in it, and politely invited Marie to take a seat. As soon as she did so, the shepherds and shepherdesses danced a pretty ballet, to which the hunters and huntresses played the music on their horns, and then all disappeared among the thickets. "I must really apologize for the poor style in which this dance was executed, dear Mrs. Stallbaum," said the Nutcracker. "These people all belong to our wire ballet and troupe, and they can only do the same thing over and over again. Had we not better go on a little farther?" "Oh, I'm sure it was all most delightful, and I enjoyed it immensely," said Marie, as she stood up and followed Nutcracker, who was going on leading the way. They went by the side of a gently rippling brook, which seemed to be what was giving out all the perfume which filled the wood. "This is Orange Brook," said Nutcracker, "but except for its sweet scent, it is nothing like as fine a water as the river Lemonade, a beautiful broad stream which falls, as this one does also, into the almond milk sea." And indeed, Marie soon heard a louder splashing and rushing, and came in sight of the river Lemonade, which went rolling along in swelling waves of a yellowish color, between banks covered with the herbage and underwood, which shone like green carbuncles. A remarkable freshness and coolness, strengthening heart and breast, exhaled from this fine river. Not far from it a dark yellow stream crept sluggishly along, giving out a most delicious odor, and on its banks sat numbers of pretty children, angling for little fat fishes which they ate as soon as they caught them. These fish were very much like filberts, Marie saw when she came closer. A short distance further, on the banks of the stream, stood a nice little village. The houses of this village, and the church, the parsonage, and the barns, and so forth, were all dark brown with gilt roofs, and many of the walls looked as if they were plastered over with lemon peel and shelled almonds. "That is Gingerthorpe on Honey River," said Nutcracker. "It is famed for the good looks of its inhabitants, but they are very short-tempered people, because they suffer so much from toothache. So we won't go there at present." At this moment Marie caught sight of a little town where the houses were all sorts of colors and quite transparent, exceedingly pretty to look at. Nutcracker went on towards this town, and Marie heard a noise of a bustle and a merriment, and saw some thousands of nice little folks unloading a number of wagons which were drawn up in the marketplace. What they were unloading from the wagons looked like packages of colored paper and tablets of chocolate. "This is Bonbonville," Nutcracker said. "An embassy has just arrived from the paper land, and the king of the chocolate. These poor Bonbonville people have been vexatiously threatened lately by the Fly Admiral's forces, so they're covering their homes over with their presents from Paperland, and constructing fortifications with the fine pieces of workmanship which the Chocolate King has sent them. But oh, dearest Miss Stallbaum, we're not going to restrict ourselves to seeing the small towns and villages on this country. Let us be off to the metropolis." He stepped quickly onwards, and Marie followed him, all expectation. Soon a beautiful rosy vapor began to rise, suffusing everything with a soft splendor. She saw that this was reflected from a rose-red shining water, which went splashing and rushing away in front of them in wavelets of rosegate silver. And on this delightful water, which kept broadening and broadening out wider and wider, like a great lake, the loveliest swans were floating. white as silver, with collars of gold, and as if viewing with each other, they were singing the most beautiful songs, of which little fish, glittering like diamonds, danced up and down in the rosy ripples. "Oh," cried Marie in the greatest delight, "this must be the lake which Godpapa Drosselmeyer wants going to make for me, and I'm the girl who is to play with the swans." Nutcracker gave a sneering sort of laugh, such as she had never seen in him before, and said, "My uncle could never make a thing of this kind. You'd be much more likely to do it yourself, but don't let us bother about that. Rather let us go sailing over the water, Lake Rosa here, to the metropolis." Chapter 11. The Metropolis. Nutcracker clapped his little hands again, and the waves of Lake Rosa began to sound louder and to splash higher, and Marie became aware of a sort of car approaching from the distance, made wholly of glittering precious stones of every color, and drawn by 2 dolphins with scales of gold. 12 of the dearest little Negro boys with head dresses and doublets made of humlong bird feathers woven together jumped to land, and carried first Marie and then Nutcracker, gently gliding above the water, into the car, which immediately began to move along over the lake of its own accord. Oh, how beautiful it was when Marie went onward thus over the waters in the shell-shaped car, with the rose perfume breathing around her, and the rosy waves splashing about. The 2 golden-scaled dolphins lifted their nostrils and sent streams of crystal high into the air, and as these fell down in glittering, sparkling rainbows, there was a sound of the 2 delicate, silvery voices singing, "Who comes over the rosy sea? Fairy is she. Bim, bim, fishes, sim, sim. Swans, sta, sta. Golden birds, tra-tra, rosy waves, wake you and sing, sparkle and ring, sprinkle and cling, and this the fairy we languish to see, coming at last to us over the sea. Rosy waves dash, bright dolphins play, merrily, merrily on." But the 12 little black boys at the back of the car seemed to take some umbrage at this song of the water jets, for they shook the sunshades that were holding, so that the palm leaves they were made of clattered and rattled together. And they shook them. They stamped an odd sort of rhythm with their feet. "Those boys are merry, amusing fellows," said Nutcracker, a little put out, "but they'll set the whole lake into a state of regular mutiny on my hands," and in fact there did begin a confused and confusing noise of strange voices, which seemed to be floating both in the water and in the air. However, Marie paid no attention to it, but went on looking into the perfumed rosy waves, from each of which a pretty girl's face smiled back to her. "Oh, look at Princess Pirlipat," she cried, clapping her hands with gladness, "smiling at me so charmingly, down there. Do look at her, Mr. Drosselmeyer." But Nutcracker sighed almost sorrowfully and said, "That's not Princess Pirlipat, dearest Miss Dalbum. It's only yourself. Always your own lovely face smiling up from the rosy waves." At this Marie drew her head quickly back, closed her eyes as tightly as she could, and was terribly ashamed. But just then the 12 little boys lifted her out of the car and sat her on the shore. She found herself in a small thicket or a grove, almost more beautiful even than the Christmas wood. Everything glittered and sparkled so in it, and the fruit on the trees was extraordinarily wonderful and beautiful, and not only of very curious colors, but with the most delicious perfume. "Oh," said the Nutcracker, "here we are in Comfit Grove, and wonder lies in the metropolis. How shall I set about describing all the wonderful and beautiful sights which Marie now saw, or give any idea of the splendor and magnificence of the city which lay stretched out before her on a flowery plain? Not only did the walls and the towers of it shine in the brightest and most gorgeous colors, but the shape and the appearance of the buildings were like nothing to be seen on earth. Instead of roofs on the houses, there were beautiful twining crowns, and the towers were garlanded with beautiful leaf-work, sculptured and carved into exquisite, intricate designs. As they passed in at the gateway, which looked as if it was made entirely of macaroons and sugared fruits, silver soldiers presented arms, and a little man in a brocade dressing-gown threw himself upon Nutcracker's neck, crying, "Welcome, dearest prince, welcome to Sweetmeatburg." Marie wondered not a little to see a very grand personage recognize young Mr. Drosselmeyer as a prince, but she heard such a number of small delicate voices making such a loud clamoring and talking, and such a laughing and chattering going on, and such a singing and playing, that she couldn't give her attention to anything else, but asked Drosselmeyer what was the meaning of it all. Oh, it's nothing out of the common, dearest Miss Dalbum, he answered. Sweetmeatburg is a large, populous city, full of mirth and entertainment. This is only the usual thing that is always going on here every day. Please to come on a little further. After a few paces more, they were in the great marketplace, which presented the most magnificent appearance. All the houses which were round it were of filigreed sugar-work, with galleries towering above galleries, and in the center stood a lofty cake covered with sugar, by way of an obelisk, with fountains round it spouting orangeade, lemonade, and other delicious beverages into the air. The runnels at the sides of the footways were full of creams which you might have ladled up with a spoon if you had chosen. But prettier than all this were the delightful little people, who were crowding about everywhere by the thousands, shouting, laughing, playing, and singing, in short, producing all that jubilant uproar which Marie had heard from the distance. They were beautifully dressed ladies and gentlemen, Greeks and Armenians, Tyrolese and Jews, officers and soldiers, clergymen, shepherds, jack-puddings, in short, people of every conceivable kind to be found in the world. The tumult grew greater towards one in the corner. The people streamed asunder, for the great mogul happened to be passing along there in his palanquin, attended by 93 grandees of the realm, and 700 slaves. But it chanced that the Fishermen's Guild, about 500 strong, were keeping a festival at the opposite corner of the place, and it was rather an unfortunate coincidence that the Grand Turk took it in his head just at this particular moment to go out for a ride, and cross the square with 3,000 janissaries. And if this were not enough, the grand procession of the interrupted sacrifice came along at the same time, marching up towards the obelisk with a full orchestra playing, and the chorus singing, "Hail, all hail to the glorious sun." So there was a stronging and a shoving and a driving and a squeaking, and soon lamentations arose and cries of pain, for one of the fishermen had knocked a Brahmin's head off in the throng, and the great mogul had been very nearly run down by a jack-pudding. The din grew wilder and wilder. People were beginning to shove one another, and even to come to fisticuffs, when the man in the brocade dressing-gown, who had welcomed Nutcracker as prince at the gate, clambered up to the top of the obelisk, and after a very clear tinkling bell had rung 3 times, shouted very loudly, 3 several times, "Pastry cook, pastry cook, pastry cook!" Instantly the tumult subsided. Everybody tried to save his bacon as quickly as he could, and after the entangled processions had been got disentangled, the dirt properly brushed off the great mogul, and the Brahmin's head stuck on again, all right, the merry noise went on just the same as before. "Tell me why that gentleman called out pastry cook, Mr. Drosselmeyer, please," said Marie. "Oh, dearest Miss Dalbum," said Nutcracker, "in this place, pastry cook means a certain unknown and very terrible power, which, it is believed, can do with people just what it chooses. It represents the fate, or destiny, which rules these happy little people, and they stand in such awe and terror of it, that the mere mention of the name quells the wildest tumult in a moment, as the burgomaster has just shown. Nobody thinks further of earthly matters, cuffs in the ribs, broken heads, or the like. Everyone retires with himself and says, 'What is man, and what is his ultimate destiny?'" Marie could not forbear a cry of admiration and utmost astonishment as she now found herself all of a sudden before a castle shining in rosy radiance, with 100 beautiful towers, here and there at intervals upon its walls, which were rich bouquets of violets, narcissus, tulips, carnations, whose dark glowing colors heightened the dazzling whiteness, inclining in rose color of all the walls. The great dome of the central building, as well as the pyramidal roofs of the towers, were set all over with thousands of sparkling gold and silver stars. "Aha!" said Nutcracker, "here we are at Marchpane Castle at last." Marie was sunk and absorbed in contemplation of this magic palace, but the fact did not escape her that the roof was wanting to one of the principal towers, and that little man, up upon a scaffold made of sticks of cinnamon, were busy putting it on again. But before she had time to ask Nutcracker about this, he said, "This beautiful castle was a short time since threatened with tremendous havoc, if not with total destruction. Sweet Tooth, the giant, happened to be passing by, and he bit off the top of that tower there, and was beginning to gnaw at the great dome. But the Sweetmeat people brought him a whole quarter of the town by way of tribute, and a considerable slice of Comfit Grove into the bargain. This stopped his mouth, and he went on his way. At this moment soft, beautiful music was heard, and out came 12 little pages with lighted clove sticks, which they held in their little hands by way of torches. Each of their heads was a pearl, their bodies were emeralds and rubies, and their feet were beautifully worked pure gold. After them came 4 ladies about the size of Marie's Miss Clara, but so glorious and brilliantly attired that Marie saw in a moment they could be nothing but princesses of the blood royal. They embraced Nutcracker most tenderly and shed tears of gladness, saying, "Oh, dearest prince, beloved brother." Nutcracker seemed deeply affected. He wiped away his tears, which flowed thick and fast, and then he took Marie by the hand and said with much pathos and solemnity, "This is Miss Marie Stahlbaum, the daughter of a most worthy medical man, and the preserver of my life. Had she not thrown her slipper just in the nick of time, had she not procured me the pensioned colonel's sword, I should have been laying in my cold grave at this moment, bitten to death by the accursed king of the mice. I ask you to tell me candidly, can Princess Pirlipat, princess though she may be, compare for a moment with Miss Stahlbaum here in beauty, in goodness, in virtue of every kind? My answer is emphatically no." All the ladies cried no, and they fell upon Marie's neck with sobs and tears and cried, "O noble preserver of our beloved royal brother, excellent Miss Stahlbaum." They now conducted Marie and Nutcracker into the castle, to a hall where walls compassed of sparkling crystal. But what delighted Marie most of all was the furniture. There were the most darling little chairs, bureaus, writing tables, and so forth, standing about everywhere, all made of cedar or Brazil wood, covered with golden flowers. The princesses made Marie and Nutcracker sit down, and said that they would themselves prepare a banquet. So they went and brought quantities of little cups and dishes of the finest Japanese porcelain, and spoons, knives, and forks, graters and stew pans, and other kitchen utensils of gold and silver. Then they fetched the most delightful fruits and sugar things, such as Marie had never seen the likes of, and began to squeeze the fruit in the daintiest way with their little hands, and to grate the spices and rub down the sugar almonds. In short, they set to work so skillfully that Marie could see very well how accomplished they were in kitchen matters, and what a magnificent banquet there was going to be. Knowing her own skill in this line, she wished in her secret heart that she might be allowed to go and help the princesses and have a finger in all these pies herself. And the prettiest of the Nutcracker sisters, just as if she had read the wishes of Marie's heart, handed her a little gold mortar, saying, "Sweet friend, dear preserver of my brother, would you mind just pounding a little of the sugar candy?" Now, as Marie went on pounding in the mortar, with a good will and the utmost enjoyment, and the sound of it was like a lovely song, Nutcracker began to relate with much minuteness and proximity all that had happened on the occasion of the terrible engagement between his forces and the army of the King of the Mice. How he had the worst of it on account of his bad behavior of his troops, how the horrible Mouse King had all but bitten him to death, so that Marie had to sacrifice a number of his subjects who were in her service, etc. During all this, it seemed to Marie as if what Nutcracker was saying, and even the sound of her own mortar, kept growing more and more indistinct and going farther and farther away. Presently she saw a silver mistiness rising up all about, like clouds, in which the princesses, the pages, the Nutcracker, and herself were floating. And a curious singing and a buzzing and humming began, which seemed to die away in the distance, and then she seemed to be going up, up, as if it was on waves, constantly rising and swelling higher and higher, higher and higher, higher and higher. Chapter 12. Conclusion. And then came a poof, and Marie fell down from some inconceivable height. That was a crash and a tumble. However, she opened her eyes, and lo and behold, there she was in her own bed. It was broad daylight, and her mother was standing at her bedside, saying, "Well, what a sleep you have had! Breakfast has been ready for ever so long." Of course, dear audience, you see how it was. Marie, confounded and amazed by all the wonderful things that she had seen, had fallen asleep at last in Marchpane Castle, and the little pages and perhaps the princesses themselves had carried her home and put her to bed. "Oh, mother darling," said Marie, "what a number of places young Mr. Drosselmeyer has taken me to in the night. What beautiful things I have seen." And she gave very much the same faithful account of it as I have done off to you. Her mother listened, looking at her with much astonishment, and when she had finished, said, "You've had a long, beautiful dream, Marie, but now you must put it all out of your head." Marie firmly maintained that she had not been dreaming at all. So her mother took her to the glass cupboard, lifted out the Nutcracker from his usual position on the third shelf, and said, "You silly girl, how can you believe that this wooden figure can have life and motion?" "Oh, mother," answered Marie, "I know perfectly well that Nutcracker is young Mr. Drosselmeyer from Nuremberg, Godpapa Drosselmeyer's nephew." Her father and mother both burst into ringing laughter. "It's all very well your laughing at poor Nutcracker, father," cried Marie, almost weeping, "but he spoke very highly of you, for when we arrived at Marchpane Castle, and he was introducing me to his sisters, the princesses, he said you were a most worthy medical man." The laughter grew louder, and Louise and even Fritz joined in. Marie ran into the next room, took the Mouse King's 7 crowns from her little box, and handed them to her mother, saying, "Look there, then, dear mother. Those are the Mouse King's 7 crowns which young Mr. Drosselmeyer gave me last night as proof that he had gotten the victory." Her mother gazed in amazement at the little crowns, which were made of very brilliant, wholly unknown metal, and worked more beautifully than any human hands could have worked them. Dr. Stahlbaum could not cease looking at them with admiration and astonishment either, and both the father and the mother enjoined Marie most earnestly to tell them where she really had got them from. But she could only repeat what she had said before, and when her father scolded her and accused her of untruthfulness, she began to cry bitterly, and said, "Oh, dear me, what can I tell you except the truth, poor unfortunate girl that I am?" At this moment the door opened, and Godpapa Drosselmeyer came in crying, "Hullo, hullo, what's all this, my little Marie crying? What's all this? What's all this?" Dr. Stahlbaum told him all about it, and showed him the crowns. As soon as he had looked at them, however, he cried out, "Stuff and nonsense, stuff and nonsense. These are the crowns I used to wear on my watch chain. I gave them as a present to Marie on her 2nd birthday. Do you mean to tell me you don't remember?" None of them did remember anything of the kind, but Marie, seeing that her father and mother's faces were clear of clouds again, ran up to her godpapa crying, "You know all about the affair, Godpapa Drosselmeyer. Tell it to them then. Let them know from your own lips that my Nutcracker is your nephew, young Mr. Drosselmeyer, from Nuremberg, and that it was he who gave me the crowns." But Drosselmeyer made a very angry face and muttered, "Stupid stuff and nonsense," upon which Marie's father took her in front of him and said with much earnestness, "Now just look here, Marie. Let there be an end of all this foolish trash and absurd nonsense for once and all. I'm not going to allow any more of it, and if I ever hear you say it again, that idiotic, misshapen Nutcracker is your godpapa's nephew, I shall shy not only Nutcracker, but all of your other playthings, Miss Clara not excepted, out of the window." Of course, poor Marie dared not utter another word concerning that which her whole mind was full of, for you may well suppose that it was impossible for anyone who had seen all that she had seen to forget it, and I regret to say that even Fritz himself at once turned his back on his sister whenever she wanted to talk to him about the wonderful realm in which she had been so happy indeed. He said it to have frequently murmured, "Stupid goose," between his teeth, though I can scarcely think this compatible with his proved kindness of heart. This much, however, is matter of certainty, that, as he no longer believed what his sister had said, he now, on a public parade, formally recanted what he had said to his red hussars, and, in the place of the plumes he had deprived them of, gave them much taller and finer ones of goose quills, and allowed them to sound the march of the hussars of the guard as before. Marie did not dare to say anything more of her adventures, but the memories of that fairy realm haunted her with sweet intoxication, and the music of that delightful, happy country still rang sweetly in her ears, whenever she allowed her thoughts to dwell on all those glories she saw with them again, and so it came about that, instead of playing, as she used to do, she sat, quiet and meditative, absorbed within herself, Everybody found fault with her for being this sort of little dreamer. It chanced one day that Godpapa Drosselmeyer was repairing one of the clocks in the house, and Marie was sitting beside the glass cupboard, sunk in her dreams and gazing at Nutcracker. All at once she said, as if involuntarily, "Oh, dear Mr. Drosselmeyer, if you really were alive, I shouldn't be like Princess Pirlipat and despise you because you had to give up being a nice, handsome gentleman for my sake." "Stupid stuff and nonsense," cried Godpapa Drosselmeyer. But as he spoke, there came such a tremendous bang and shock that Marie fell from her chair, insensible. When she came back to her senses, her mother was busied about her and said, "How could you go and tumble off your chair in that way? A big girl like you. Here's Godpapa Drosselmeyer's nephew come from Nuremberg. See how good you can be." Marie looked up. Her godpapa had got on his yellow coat and his glass wig, and was smiling in the highest good humor. By the hand he was holding a very small, but very handsome young gentleman. His little face was red and white. He had on a beautiful red coat trimmed with gold face, white silk stockings and shoes, with a lovely bouquet of flowers in his shirt frill. He was beautifully frizzled and powdered, and had a magnificent queue hanging down his back. The little sword at his side seemed to be made entirely of jewels. It sparkled and shone so, and the little hat under his arm was woven of flocks of silk. He gave proof of the fineness of his manners in that he had brought for Marie a quantity of the most delightful toys, above all, the very same figures as those which the Mouse King had eaten up, as well as beautiful saber for Fritz. He cracked nuts at table for the whole party. The very hardest did not withstand him. He placed them in his mouth with his left hand, tugged at his pigtail with his right, and crack, they fell in pieces. Marie grew red as a rose at the sight of this charming young gentleman, and she grew redder still when, after dinner, young Drosselmeyer asked her to go with him to the glass cupboard in the sitting room. "Play nicely together, children," said Godpapa Drosselmeyer. "Now that my clocks are all nicely in order, I can have no possible objection." But as soon as young Drosselmeyer was alone with Marie, he went down on one knee and spoke as follows. "Oh, my most dearly beloved Miss Stahlbaum, see here at your feet the fortunate Drosselmeyer whose life you saved here on this very spot. You were kind enough to say, plainly and unmistakably, in so many words, that you would not have despised me, as Princess Pirlipat did, if I had been turned ugly for your sake. Immediately I ceased to be a contemplative Nutcracker, and resumed my former not altogether ill-looking person and form. Oh, most exquisite lady, bless me with your precious hand, share with me my crown and my kingdom, and reign with me in Marchpane Castle, for there I am now king." Marie raised him and said gently, "Dear Mr. Drosselmeyer, you are a kind, nice gentleman, and as you reign over a delightful country of charming, funny, pretty people, I accept your hand." So then they were formally betrothed, and when a year and a day had come and gone, they say he came and fetched her away in a golden coach drawn by silver horses. At the marriage there danced 22,000 of the most beautiful dolls and other figures, all glittering in pearls and diamonds, and Marie is to this day the queen of a realm where all kinds of sparkling Christmas wood and transparent marchpane castles. In short, the most wonderful and beautiful things of every kind are to be seen by those who have the eyes to see them. So this is the end of the tale of Nutcracker and the King of the Mice. The end. I really, really like that. I'd never read the story. I've seen the ballet many, many times. I've seen kids do it and adults do it, and I really got a kick out of this. This one was fun. I hope you guys have had a really great Christmas Eve or Christmas Day or day after Christmas, whenever you guys are listening to this. Thanks for being part of my little world. Until next time, bye.